Okay, so we've got these little feeling charts, laying around, the group room, and it on the surface it looks kind of silly, but truly, people identifying how they feel is the first step, and so I think that's really important.
Welcome back to the Sina Good Health Podcast. Today I have Shelly Petrik. Full disclosure, she is my mother-in-law, but the main reason we're talking to her is she's also an LADC, an addictions counselor. So today we're going to talk about how alcohol and the pandemic and just alcohol use has shot up a lot. So just kind of people turning to alcohol instead of actually addressing their emotional issues. So do you want to start off with talking about just how alcohol for a lot of adults is kind of a social lubricant?
Sure. Alcohol can be used as something to relax us, to help us unwind at the end of the day, to enjoy time with our friends. But for some individuals, the use of alcohol can lead to more problematic drinking. And that's when they require more and more of a drink or a substance to get the same effects that they got initially when they started drinking.
Mm-hmm. So I know the health and fitness world, they talk about I want to say it's 1 to 2 glasses, and it depends on alcohol, but 1 to 2 glasses for women, and then 3 or whatever for guys, a day is too much. Do you have your own kind of guidelines for how much is too much for people?
Well, that's going to be vary from individual to individual.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of times, people will kind of test that out in their younger years, as adolescent or pre-adult kind of years. And what happens is people just kind of generally grow out of maybe more abusive drinking, if you will, drink to the point of intoxication.
Yeah.
And so every individual is going to learn kind of what they can handle in terms of their alcohol and what is kind of their cutoff point.
Sure.
So that's going to vary from individual to individual, but I think you're pretty on target with the limits that you just said for the differences in males and females before they're going to start seeing some effect of that. Mm-hmm. And really, when it becomes more problematic is when they start seeing changes in their behavior, and that could be different from individual to individual too. Some people become much more social and outgoing. Some people are more drastically affected by their moods. They may become more angry, more isolative, more display more acting out behaviors. Everything may become a challenge, when you hear of bar brawls, after hours, that type of thing. So individuals really need to know how they respond to the use of alcohol, themselves.
Yeah. So I'm guessing it's a myth with, some people talk about certain alcohol affects them different ways. I'm guessing it's more alcohol is alcohol and just how much you're drinking and have eaten and all that.
Absolutely. A lot of things can affect use of alcohol. One, of course, being body size, body type, gender to a certain extent, how much food you consume, the mood that you're in, and the environment in which you're using or drinking.
Right.
Is it a social environment? Is it one that you're more isolated and alone in your own house? And so all of those things affect the intake of alcohol.
Yeah. So another thing, I don't remember where I heard or read this, but it's talking about alcohol kind of brings out what's underneath. You want to talk about that?
Sure. So a lot of times we have emotions just lying under the surface, if you will. And what alcohol does is kind of lowers our inhibitions. Okay, so say for example, you've annoyed me in some way, in the recent past. And I've been kind of harboring that, okay? What alcohol does is kind of lower those inhibitions and may make me a little bit have the courage, sometimes people call it courage in a bottle, that I may, just have my inhibitions lowered enough to just tell you how I really feel, okay? And as we can see, that's going to be a setup for potential confrontation, right? Mm-hmm. Then you yourself may be harboring things that maybe you've wanted to say to me. And so that I'm giving you permission, right? By virtue of me saying something, that becomes an invitation for you to respond back to me. Right. So we can see that in those types of situations and in the current state of affairs that we're kind of living in right now, that can be a recipe for some real concern.
So you touched on it a little bit. Do you want to talk more about just like everybody tries or experiences alcohol typically at a younger age, and then just kind of talk about like learned patterns of behavior, including drinking? Sure.
We are all exposed to use of alcohol and even other chemicals to a certain extent, primarily how we were raised, right? So was alcohol something that was, how was it used in, your growing up? Right. A lot of times that is centered around celebrations in many families. And for some families it may be more of a day-to-day occurrence. And maybe that's where problematic drinking may begin for some people. So we all enter, let's say adolescence, young adulthood, with our own personal experiences related to alcohol. And we take those into our relationships throughout adolescence and adulthood. And that's going to vary, for each individual. For a lot of people, I'm thinking of the example of, kids who go away to maybe college for the first time and no longer have mom and dad looking over their shoulder, monitoring, their every move. And so they have freedom. Right? They have freedom, access, money, and so they make choices, that may include experimentation of alcohol or other drugs. And so, but they're also taking with that those experiences and those messages, right, that they received as children growing up. What were their messages of drink responsibly? Was the message of complete abstaining from alcohol, that it's, in some religions it's taboo? Or was the use of alcohol more prevalent and open and expected, maybe use at a young age? So, and as we reach young adulthood, we begin writing our own story of our use of alcohol or chemicals, and but we take with us those messages and those experiences from childhood.
Right. So where do you think the most powerful or resonant messages come from? Like, is it family? Is it pop culture? Is it friends?
I would say primarily it's going to come from family initially. That is, usually who we're around, up until adolescence, preteen, adolescent years, when of course our friends become more important, and their input carries more weight at that time in our life than parental input. So we as parents want to make sure that we're giving those messages at a young age that we want our children to carry into adolescence and young adulthood.
Yeah.
Because we know that there's going to come a time that that voice of their peers is going to be louder and more frequent, right, than that of the parents.
Yeah, like my dad, I remember like when I was really young, he would occasionally have a beer after work or whatever, like just kind of like one of those relax, or on a Saturday or whatever. And then I don't remember specifically when, but I'm guessing when I was an early teenager, he just decided to stop having alcohol in the house entirely, just to not tempt fate, which, I mean, and Tori and I both are not really drinkers at all. Like, we drink a couple times a year, and not obviously like blackout drunk or anything either. So,
So that was your personal message that you took into adulthood, and as an adult now can see what your dad did, maybe to, give you a clearer message in, in adolescence that, hey, we just don't want any of this. Now, in my family growing up, we had, alcohol was a constant, right? There was always liquor in the liquor cabinet, there was always beer in the refrigerator. It was something that was available Friday and Saturday night dinners. I think my parents were, of the belief if we were going to drink, they wanted to see it happen, in our own home versus,
friends,
in cars, driving around, that sort of thing. So, different messages, different times as well.
Right.
Yeah.
It's interesting to me that drinking is such like a worship may not be the right word, but it's like such an idealized activity in our culture.
It's definitely prominent, especially around celebrations. There are some, families that's a given. We go to celebrate something, there's going to be beer, wine, hard liquor involved in it. It's kind of something that we've come to expect. It's legitimate, it's legal, so therefore there's some acceptance that involves the use of alcohol in our day-to-day activities. It's as common as baseball and the American dream, right?
Sure.
So it's an accepted form of part of our leisure and recreation.
Yeah, and I definitely understand I have my own like personal bias for that. But so, were you gonna say something?
No.
Okay. So with the pandemic, when we started, like, and a lot of stores are shutting down, and liquor stores were still considered essential, and it's just interesting, like, because I'm in the fitness community, and there are people like, why are liquor stores allowed to be open and gyms aren't?
Right.
So you want to talk about like people kind of stocking up and spending more time at home and drinking more?
Right. It is interesting that is considered an essential business of sorts. Now, I will jump into something that maybe the average person doesn't necessarily think about, but people with problem alcohol use, addiction of alcohol, alcohol withdrawal. So meaning if we would take away alcohol from someone who has become, their use has become so problematic that they can't get through a day without it. So that would be, extreme substance use of alcohol,
Right.
that we would call that. Alcohol withdrawal is the only type of withdrawal from an addiction that has the potential to be life-threatening. Okay, so with that being said, you could withdraw from any other substance and not put your physical health at risk.
Right.
And so So that's one concern. Now, do I think that's the only reason that bars were, essential businesses? Absolutely not.
Right.
But I did want to just throw that out there, that, there is some concern that if, you just took away something that a certain percentage of the population needs, because it is a need at that point. It has become not just a psychological need, but a physiological need for individuals, that they put themselves at risk. Now, I think a more common thought in terms of the pandemic is that alcohol is clearly a coping.
Bread and circuses comes to mind.
For individuals coping with stress, right? Yeah. If we've had a great day at the office, we don't necessarily come home and say, it was a great day at the office, I think I'm going to have a beer. We might, similar to we might have a nice cold beer after mowing the lawn or something, to that effect. But it is a more likely scenario that we will come home after a crappy day at the office and go, I'm going to go stop at the bar with my friend Joe and knock back a couple, right? And we may go with the assumption of it being, one or two. If it was a really bad day, it might end up more than that, and we're calling home and saying, hey, can somebody come get me, right? Or I'm going to call a cab, or, something equally as safe, hopefully, that we're doing. So my point in saying that is that alcohol is, it is often used as a way to cope with stressors that we have not developed alternative coping mechanisms to utilize in some of the current stressors that a lot of people are under right now. And so that probably is a more plausible reason why liquor stores are still open and seen as vital, and their sales are rocketing. I mean, there's no denying that. They're a business that, is not probably at risk of going under, at this point.
Yeah, and we also did some stories about how, I think Iowa did it, where restaurants can do, to go and include alcoholic drinks in there, and I think Minnesota was working on it, and Wisconsin did it or is trying to pass it or something. I don't know. State to state it varies. But
yeah. Well, and it's also a way for businesses, to increase their income
for sure.
A little bit. I mean, the markup on alcohol, no surprise, is pretty significant. Mm-hmm. And so, we of course want businesses to stay open, during this time as well. So they're getting creative, in how they're marketing to people.
Yeah, and that being in journalism, it's really interesting because you get to see the challenge from the political leadership aspect of how do you balance safety versus not having all your businesses shut down and killing the economy that way. And it's it was just really interesting to kind of see and get that broader perspective. So especially last spring, we've got people spending more time at home, possibly working from home, so they're stressed and unemployed. So what are your thoughts about why people struggle with dealing with their emotions or issues?
Well, I think barring the pandemic, barring anything else, people in general have a difficult time dealing with their emotions and talking about things that are difficult to talk about. And we just as a society in general need to get better at that, right? We live in a society where it's very easy to blame others for, whatever is going wrong in our life, right? And have a difficulty taking responsibility for things that truly do fall on us to address and make changes if necessary, or walk away, or do whatever we need to do to make changes. And so what has happened with the presentation of a pandemic is it's really highlighted how much more work we have to do in that area, right? I work with many professionals in the medical field who are, absolutely burned out, are, working incredible hours, keeping in mind that, they're under the same pressure of this, pandemic and things as everyone else, and are struggling to help people, and drawing on, many times very few reserves that they have available to them as well. I mean, some of the things that, we as professionals use to keep ourselves healthy and increased ability to help others are not necessarily at our disposal too. I'm thinking like travel, doing things that we enjoy, that, going to places that are shut down, not in business right now. And so that becomes a challenge for all of us. So we're all in the same boat. What varies is individual resilience to address stress in their life. Mm-hmm. So some individuals are just better at addressing that under, let's say, normal circumstances, in the absence of a pandemic. But when added stressors come on, then it becomes more difficult for all of us. But those individuals who have developed healthy coping mechanisms over the years are going to come out of this season of time in a less scarred way than other people who have not. So what can we do? That's going to likely be one of the next questions that you ask me, right? What can we do to address this? And the answer really is to tap into things that bring you joy, is first and foremost. And for, some people, and let's be honest, there's people right now that are being taxed worse than others. I'm thinking of single families. I'm thinking of families with young children who are, juggling work schedules, teaching their children in ways that, we've never, had to do. Trying to juggle jobs that, maybe people have the option of working from home. A lot of, professionals do. Other individuals don't. So, there are extreme people losing their job, not, living on unemployment, if that's something that's available to them. And it's not to everybody. I think that's, something that isn't exactly, known. And so the stressors are enormous. And so we have to figure out a way to cope with those stressors in a way that's not going to lead to self-destructive behavior, use of chemicals, alcohol, burning our relationships, right? With the and we're being tested because we're with people now more than ever that supposedly we love the most, right? But we begin to turn on them, because we don't know what to do with this stress that has mounted. I mentioned doing something that brings you joy. And that sometimes for individuals is reflecting, doing a little self-reflection. What are things in the past that have given me joy, given me reason to smile, right? Given me something that brings me pleasure, pleasant memories. And maybe it's something I used to do in my childhood. One of the things that, has really taken off lately is the coloring, the, adult coloring books. And there's a reason. It's relaxing, right? It's colorful, it's pretty, it's fun. Hopefully you're coloring pictures of something that, brings you some sort of peace and contentment, those sort of things. but tapping it doesn't have to be anything real expensive, so finding something. Gosh, this is a perfect time because you're in the health industry as well as the journalism industry, is, how can we take better care of ourselves? That requires little to no money at all, right? Mm-hmm. Are we getting out with nature? Are we taking a walk? Are we doing, taking our dog for a walk, exploring our neighborhoods, checking out our parks, maybe those things that, we've always said we were going to do and just haven't taken the time to do. So how are we, this is a perfect opportunity to make improvements in your own personal health and well-being. I'm talking emotional health, spiritual health, physical health, and maybe even to a certain extent financial health. I was talking to somebody recently who said, we had to look seriously at our budget. They had some changes in their income, and she said for the first time in our life, we really sat down and said, what are we spending? What are we spending on our utilities, on our mortgage payment, on food, and where can we cut back? There were some logical things that they were able to cut back on just because they're not open, gym memberships, things like that. But she said, we have been lucky, we've been blessed that we haven't, had to do that. And now we took the opportunity to really fine tune and trim some of our, personal budgeting. What can we do better? Can we get better at saving so we don't have to panic when, things like this happen? Could we have been better prepared, than, maybe we were? Right. So those are areas in our life that cost no money, that, again, people who are able to cope better in these current situations, they're doing those things, right? They're the individuals that are saying, this is something that we have to get through, but it's not horrible. It's not killing us. It's not, we're taking some time to do some things that we probably should have been doing all along. So take note of those four things. How's my physical health? How's my emotional health? How's my spiritual health? How's my financial health? Is there anything that I can do during this time to improve those things that are going to lower that stress level for me?
Yeah. So what, you mentioned that people respond in different ways to difficult times or tragedy. So is there anything you're aware of that kind of determines how people either kind of build off of tragedy or kind of end up in a downward spiral?
Sure. I think it's all in how we look at things, right? So there is a tendency to look at every situation as either a negative or a positive, right? We all know people in our lives that are just more positive by nature, right? And there are others who will see that glass as half empty no matter how many times it's refilled, right? That's just their personality, right? And so it is a challenge for us to weigh things, and how much negativity am I willing to give this, or am I able to see any positive in it, right? We were just talking about this the other day, my daughter and I, your wife and I, we were just taking a look at 2020, and the things that, and I made the comment, to her that, 2020 wasn't all bad. I mean, we had this pandemic and there's things going on in the world that, make me, gasp or, whatever. But it's given me some time, to really reflect on some of those four things that I was just talking about. And to try to make some changes or some further commitment to make some changes, right? We don't jump on all of this in one fell swoop, because we're humans and we just don't do that, right? And so it takes time. It takes time to make any change of any kind. But really, to go back to your point, is to really how, I'm going to call it an attitude check, right? Because that's kind of what it is. Am I choosing to see everything in the negative? Oh my gosh, we're in this pandemic. I have to wear a mask. People are telling me what to do. I have to do this. I have to do that. Versus, is this an opportunity for me to do things different than I have? I'll use an example. My youngest daughter was supposed to, go to college, this year. And, we were just coming off this period of her having a less than desirable, if you will, graduation, right? Which ended up kind of for her being non-existent, And so, she went to college for 4 days. She called home and said, Mom, I don't want to just live in my dorm room and look at these 4 walls. Because she's a highly social person, right? So she had fears that this is what the entire semester is going to be, me looking at my 4 walls. And she said, will you be mad if I move home? Right? These are expectations, right? When we were talking earlier about, going into, experiences, with your preconceived, or the experiences that you're taking into that. And I said, honey, why would you think I would be mad? And she said, well, because, so this is where it becomes important, right? Because you talked about what it's going to be like to be an empty nester. All of your kids will be out of the house. So even the things that we joke about, right? We say in love and light, kids hear that. So we had to go and do some, minor repair on that, right? And say, honey, of course you can come home. Of course we don't want you to spend money that you're going to, see as wasteful or not the way you want to do that. And so she ended up staying in college, of course, but just not doing the whole on-campus living there,
right.
Type of thing. But it's given us time, another semester with her. Woohoo! It's been great.
Yeah.
Now, since then, she has determined that she is such a social person and such a hands-on learner that she's actually, changed her course of schooling right now, and has decided to withdraw from traditional college, and go, a different route, which I think in the short run is going to be a much better fit for her.
For sure.
Now, will she decide to go back to college? Maybe, but maybe under different circumstances. So the decisions that we make right now don't have to be long-term forever things, right? They can just be, adjusting our sails, so to speak, to get us to the next step where we want to be. And I think that's going to be a better fit for her. But I did feel bad, about some of the messages that even, said in light, she took to heart, so it's a good reminder as parents that, what we say has weight, and what is the true message that we want our children to hear. And I think what she did hear is that she can always come home. And that's what, that's the message that we wanted to give her. Home is always a place you can come with the people that you love and that, help with the decisions that you need to make. And so, but we give those messages about everything, right? About alcohol use, about how we keep ourselves, healthy emotionally and physically, and, all of those things, so.
Yeah, and that's what you're saying about the sending messages and joking. It's like one area that really stands out to me is when people joke about like wanting to divorce or abandon your kids or whatever, and it's just it stands out to me because it's like, you know, I feel like for my family or future family or whatever, like I would want to have that base level of respect and not even jokingly say about that, because it's like like you're saying, like it does resonate even if you know that they're joking.
Absolutely. And especially children are, they are always watching. You know, it doesn't matter how young they are, how old they are. Once you become a parent, you are being watched. And so, and they hear what we say, right? Not just what we do, but what we say. And our words cannot be louder than our actions, you know, and especially in regards to, you know, alcohol use of chemicals, that sort of thing. I mean, it's extremely hypocritical to be lighting up a cigarette, say, for example, right? And I use that only as a personal example in my own home growing up, you know. Don't ever smoke, you know, you can't stop once you start, you know. It's terrible for your health, you know. At the same time, my mother's lighting cigarette after cigarette after cigarette. So it is what we say and it's what we do, and those two have to, you know, run side by side, you know, of each other. I mean, I have to do what I say and say what I do, and mean both of those things.
Yeah. So going back to the coping skills. We can start with the question of like, why aren't they taught or emphasized more?
Are you referring to like in school or in the home or
either? I don't know what the good way to raise the emotional intelligence societally is.
Yeah. Well, I think first we have to be very mindful ourselves, right? How are we responding when things happen to us, or when things happen to our children or people that we care about? How are we responding and giving them, I'll call it the good stuff, right? How are we helping them understand disappointment, understanding hurt, dealing with frustration, anxiety, things that aren't going well in their life. You know, when I grew up, you know, some of the messages were, life isn't fair, dust yourself off and get up, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, you know. Was that always the best message? I mean, there wasn't a lot of nurturing, you know, in my, you know, time frame going up. So those were the messages that we got, you know, boys don't cry. You'll get through this. Life isn't fair. And I think, you know, in some ways we've come full circle, you know, with wanting to understand, nurture our kids different, better. But I do worry sometimes that we have, you know, nurtured kind of an environment of, if you will, of individuals that have difficulty accepting responsibility, you know, for their behavior. And, you know, if we can kind of blame something on someone else, that seems to be an acceptable way of doing things versus taking a hard look at, you know, what's my responsibility in this. I mean, I work with people all the time who, you know, when they describe, you know, maybe difficulties in a relationship or something like that, they will say, you know, they'll make it sound like it's all you, right? And when you begin to ask tough questions like, you know, what did you contribute to this conflict or this issue that you're describing? Oftentimes there becomes kind of a blank look on people's face like, oh wait, you know, this isn't going to work for me to just you know, blame something on someone else. And that's where responsibility, healing, taking accountability really starts to happen, is when I cannot worry about you or focus on you and look at me, look inwards. What do I need to do to make changes that are going to produce a more positive outcome for whatever it is I'm looking at.
So it sounds like developing self-awareness is the first step. Is there like generally a second step, or is there kind of is it a more mishmash of how people progress?
I think this sounds so basic, but it's so necessary. We have, in my work, one of the first things we do with individuals is feelings identification. Okay, so we've got these little feeling charts, laying around, the group room, and it on the surface it looks kind of silly, but truly, people identifying how they feel is the first step. And so I think that's really important. And for kids, it's going to be very basic. It's going to be, are you happy, sad, angry, frustrated, But when we can get them to recognize feelings, and then what is producing those feelings, then we're going to start to have a conversation with individuals about where hurt, fear, those underlying emotions that come across as anxiety, anger, frustration, some of those more primary feelings, but almost always, guaranteed, underneath that is hurt and fear.
Yeah.
Those are the two underlying emotions that are driving people's behavior. They've been hurt in the past, or they fear something that's going to happen. And once you can name those things, and they become real, and you can get them out there on the table to be talked about and managed in a way that isn't going to be threatening anymore, then you'll start to see progress.
Yeah, because I definitely remember growing up, and even like in recent times, like just struggling to articulate what I'm feeling. Like I'm feeling some kind of sensation, and I don't know how to describe it to like my wife or whoever. Mm-hmm. And they're like, they can tell that something's off or some whatever, but it's like, so I definitely agree. I like that concept of the feelings wheel chart thing you have to kind of help identify.
Because oftentimes people close to us will identify that something is not right with us before we will. And so they will say things like, you don't seem to be yourself lately. You seem preoccupied. Something's going on. Did something happen today? Right? And oftentimes we are, that hasn't even come to our conscience yet. We're looking at them like, you can tell. You've noticed. And so we're not very good, at hiding how we're feeling. The struggle is we don't always know what that is yet. And so once we can, do that reflection, and people are going to do that in very different ways. For some people, it's just a matter of talking. Our loved one might say, hey, did something happen today that, you're in this mood, or that you had to go to the bar, or, and then other people are more quietly self-reflective about that. They may journal, they may write. It's it's good to take the time to do, that kind of, spend time with your thoughts. And we will try to not do that, as much as we can to avoid sitting and thinking. When you allow yourself to do that, where does your mind go? Oftentimes it's going to go to that thing or that subject that is causing us discomfort, and that we need to pay attention to.
Yeah, that whole concept, it applies to a lot of different aspects of life. It's just like people run away from discomfort and they focus on the distractions like social media or whatever, and it's like I think it's Rangers, like in the military, they have the embrace the suck phrase, where it's just like, I think they apply it to like their basic training. It's like 40 days of you're sleep deprived and starving, and it's
sounds
like,
horrible.
Yeah. And it's like, John T. Reed has a whole article about how some of the stuff is macho BS, but still, it's like there's a level where you need to just go through it, and so it's just making me think about like if somebody is in why do people run away from their thoughts or the dark thoughts, like the dark place,
Mm-hmm. Well, because they're hard to confront and acknowledge, make sense of. Sometimes there's memories there that are too painful. Maybe even without, professional help, we don't even know what they are or why they have impacted us in such a way that is not being productive for us. And so it really is our challenge and our job to figure out things that are holding us back from living our best life.
Yeah, well, it's just like we kind of touched on it already, but it's like it sounds like to develop these coping skills and self-awareness and everything, it has to be you, the individual, putting in the work. Like as a parent, you can model that behavior, but there's only a certain level of emotional maturity a kid is going to be able to have, and then it's like in the adult world, if you didn't even start with the basic emotion stuff, does that kind of make sense?
It absolutely makes sense, and that is why, and I'm going to use, the frame of reference of having people come into treatment, because that's what I'm, most, familiar with and work with, is, and it can feel awkward, handing someone, a feelings chart for the first time, and they're like, they get a look about them like this is, pretty basic until they
try to actually do it.
Till they try to actually do it. And one of the things that I say to people is, let me know if there's a face on this sheet that you don't understand. Because some of them get fairly complex. If you have lived in a good, bad, right, wrong, happy, sad world, where everything is kind of polar opposites, right? Mm-hmm. And there isn't gray. And let's face it, we live our world mostly in the gray, right? So for people to understand, feelings of remorse, guilt, shame, embarrassment, may sometimes take explaining a situation, and then helping them understand what that feeling is. Someone might be describing, I worked with a young man who survived a drunk driving accident. His friend in the car did not. And so what he had was an incredible case of survivor's guilt. He could not, now he didn't understand this at the time before. He very much understood that he lived and his friend didn't, but he didn't understand all of the
processing.
All the emotional underlying feelings of anger, why me, where do I go from here, everybody hates me, I should have died too. That's some pretty heavy stuff.
Right.
And so we have to start peeling back those layers like an onion, to get to where we're able to have acceptance of certain situations so they don't consume us. Because life can consume us if we aren't able to embrace it in a more positive way.
Yeah. Well, and like this could probably be its whole other podcast episode, just like the I think the movie The Mask You Live In is about, there's a two, I guess they'd be documentaries, like there's a male and a female one, and so the male one is called The Mask You Live In, and it's, a lot of it is guys talking about like you were saying, it's the messages you receive growing up are like, be a man, boys don't cry, whatever, and it's really interesting that just the whole, like, stereotypically guys, you get like happy and angry, maybe horny, those are your moods, and it's just, how do you...
And we're human beings, so we know there's all sorts of things in between there, but we either don't understand what they are or haven't, taken, the time or done the work to understand what those are. So that is what's portrayed, right? And so we make jokes, or we have these stereotypes of men, which are really unfair, because men are deeper than what they, than what they get stereotyped. I mean, we know that to be true. However, with that being said, we also know that these messages that they've been given and these societal reinforcements, I'll call them, make it darn hard to sometimes peel back those layers, with men. Women are more naturally talkative, conversing individuals who want to share information, but that is perceived as not so welcoming, for men to do that. And it's a shame, because there's so much more depth to men than I think we as a society are really missing out on.
Yeah.
But you're right, that is a totally different podcast.
Yeah, it's like, well...
Male-female differences, we could spend an hour on that someday.
Yeah. So, with the alcohol, I guess what would be a sign for somebody like a wake-up call that you do have a drinking problem? Or is it one of those, like, you got your stereotypical intervention, your friends and your family, but you also talked about, like, with, say you have a bad day or something goes wrong and other people kind of recognize it sooner than you, so how do you, like, have your mind open to discovering there's a problem?
Right. So we do some little mini assessments, that in my work, and in some of those we just really quick, it's like 4 questions. We'll really quick ask someone, has anybody ever been concerned about your drinking? And if you say yes to that, why is that? Have you been concerned about your drinking? Have you consumed more than you intended? Do I say I'm just going to have one glass of wine and it ends up being the whole bottle? Have you ever tried to cut down on your drinking and it's been difficult or impossible to do? And so those are some questions, that you can, ask yourself, or maybe, think about if other people asked you. And if you answer yes to any of those questions, then it might be some time to take a deeper look at how much you're drinking, or if that's beginning to affect your life or your relationships.
Yeah. And I like that because it's not a black and white, like you had 4 glasses of wine, you have a huge problem.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, and I mean, 4 is a lot, but people get hung up on those specific numbers instead of, I suppose it's just because it's harder to actually assess a situation or look at yourself and your actions.
What is typical for you?
Mm-hmm.
In our family, it's drinking occasionally. Maybe having a couple drinks on a holiday, something like that. Alcohol is not a part of our daily life. And that certainly would be a red flag to me. If I started, consuming alcohol, every day. First of all, I'm sure my family would go, well, what's up with mom, but more than that, it would be like, what's my need to do that, and is there a way that I can address that in a more, in a healthier way?
We can call this the last question, as I think it'll be a good way to wrap up. So one thing you've said when we were talking earlier is just like a really good thing to come out of the pandemic is reducing the stigma of taking care of your mental health.
Absolutely. How am I doing? Really ask yourself that question. And if I'm saying not well, golly, reach out for some help. If you're not getting, the help that you need with the support of family and friends, please seek out, professional help. It's nothing to be embarrassed about. It takes courage. It does. But I promise you there are professionals out there that want to help, that they're there to help, and it doesn't have to be, sometimes it's just talking to someone, getting an opportunity to pursue some things that might be, helpful in your life, just maybe tweaking what you're already doing or haven't thought about doing, or changing your perspective, improving your attitude. But you mentioned earlier, no one can, I have no ability to change you, right? That's all got to be on us. So it goes back to that personal responsibility. What can I do to improve my life right now? And honestly, looking at those 4 areas of your life, what's causing you the most stress? Where's that coming from? And what can I do to improve that?
Yeah, so to recap for the audience, the 4 areas were physical health, mental health, spiritual, and financial.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. So I think that's a good way to wrap it up. So thanks for being on the show.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so tune in for the next one. We'll have one about that male emotional differences and all that. So tune in. Thanks.